afternoon. So nice to be with all of you. I'll ask the panel members to briefly introduce themselves before we get started. Jackie.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Jackie Blaesi-Freed, and I'm Deputy Associate Director of FinCEN's Regulatory and Strategic Affairs Division. And if you know FinCEN, and this is the first time you are hearing those words, it's the first time I have said them publicly. So it is the combined operations of what used to be our Strategic Operations Division as well as our Policy Division. We're really trying to leverage public-private partnerships as part of our policy making, so we put those two functions together in the same office. So if you know SOD and you know PD, we are the new RSD. I've been at FinCEN about 2 years. Before I was at FinCEN, I was actually at the Department of Justice. I was very privileged to represent the United States as part of the Consumer Protection Branch, where I primarily did civil and criminal cases involving transnational organized crime that perpetrated scams on American consumers. And that's me.
That's great. My name is Ken Blanco. I'm a partner at Arktouros, PLLC. Prior to Arktouros, I was the head of financial crimes at Citibank for several years. Prior to that, I was the director of FinCEN for 3 years, 3.5 years. It felt like 10. Before that, I was at the Department of Justice for 25 years. I was AUSA in Miami for many years, and I was the Deputy Assistant Attorney General for about 15 years at the Department of Justice. That's my background.
And I'm Stephanie Brooker. I'm a partner at Gibson, Dunn in Washington. I've been at the firm about 10 years, and before that, unfortunately not with Ken, I was head of enforcement and chief of staff at FinCEN, and then worked at the Department of Justice before that for several years, where I did get to work with Ken directly.
Lots of justice people.
Yes. So again, great to be with you, and it's particularly exciting, Jackie, to have you here as a current government official. We're thrilled to get to talk to you directly. In terms of the audience, we really want this to be meaningful and a dialogue, so please feel free at any point to ask a question, to make a comment. As we go along, we'll calibrate our discussion points to incorporate any comments or questions that you have. Jackie, to start, how would you characterize FinCEN's current approach overall across its many tools and authorities to thinking about AML risk and opportunities in the digital asset space?
Yeah, so that's a great place to start. And I love the way you framed that question, Stephanie, because one of the things I really love about FinCEN is the very wide range of levers that we have. You know, we have full-blown rulemaking levers, we have guidance levers, we have public-private partnership levers, we have enforcement levers, both foreign and domestic. And in the digital asset space, what we are really thinking about is how we can use those wide range of levers that we have to ensure that we're promoting the administration's policy objective, which is to really promote the responsible growth and use of digital assets. And what that means is we're thinking holistically and we're thinking strategically. So certainly as part of the Genius Act and other potential things that are coming down from the Hill, we're going to be thinking about rulemaking, but we're also thinking about things like where we can improve our guidance documents. We are thinking about things like where we can take actions, like we did in the Way 1 action, to ensure that foreign bad actors who are leveraging digital assets are not poisoning the US digital asset ecosystem, and making sure we're really building that ring fence around the United States from foreign actors who want to leverage this currency in order to perpetrate crimes. So we really are thinking strategically, we're thinking holistically, we're doing exchanges, we're talking about it as part of Bank Secrecy Act advisory. We really are trying to think of a soup to nuts way that we can really promote digital assets and ensure that we're protecting this ecosystem from illicit actors who would seek to exploit it.
Jackie, obviously FinCEN spent a lot of time over the last several years devoting its resources to enforcement in the digital assets space. How do you see FinCEN prioritizing its various tools in the current administration in terms of digital assets?
Yeah, so I think what we are thinking about, as we're always thinking about with our enforcement tool, we recognize it's a very heavy hammer that we have, and making sure that we're using it in the right cases and making sure we're using it in a way that sends messages. And so that's going to be both where we have domestic financial institutions who are not serving that gatekeeping function that the Bank Secrecy Act really requires. But what we're going to be looking at as part of that is, how does that actually play out? So do you have an institution who is willfully disregarding its Bank Secrecy Act obligations, and they're creating a loophole for cartels, or for someone who is really an administration priority actor in order to use that to access the US financial system?
Ken, how do you see the balance? Obviously, the new administration has been very clear that they are going to support the digital asset ecosystem, which was amazing news as we've seen these policy pronouncements come out over the last several months. How does that get balanced in terms of national security risk, in your view and your experience?
Well, I mean, you obviously have to balance it, right? There's privacy issues, there's just, enforcement issues as you move forward. But I think they've been really clear. There are the executive orders that you see out there. That's what the administration's priorities are. I don't think those are going to be any different in the digital asset area than they are in TRI-FI area. So, understanding those issues and understanding where the administration is going, you need to calibrate whatever institutions you work at, and whatever controls you have need to be very consistent with that. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that this administration, whether you like them or you don't like them, have been very clear where they're going, right? And it's not a mystery. All you need to do is take a look at those executive orders and take a look at the actions. Jackie, I think, brings out a great point, sending messages by some of these actions. Whether I agree with some of the actions or not, I understand the messages, right? And industry then needs to respond to that. And that's true in the way that they're looking about handling cryptocurrencies or digital assets.
Jackie, what are the key trends that FinCEN, the broader Treasury team, OFAC, your collaboration with DOJ, what are you seeing in terms of key trends in national security illicit finance typologies for digital asset ecosystem actors? I want to talk about others in a moment, but just focusing on the digital asset environment.
Yeah, so I think most of these are not going to come as a surprise, but in some way that's good. If you already know all of the typologies I'm going to lay out, it means that you're doing what you need to do to stay abreast of changes in this space. One of the things that is the same whether or not it's going to be fiat currency or digital currency is fraud. So we recently put out an alert, for instance, talking about CVC, or convertible virtual currency, which remains a tongue twister for me, even though I've been at FinCEN for 2 years, but how CVC kiosks are being leveraged by a variety of illicit actors. And a lot of the discussion in that product was related to scams. There's also a little bit of discussion in that product related to use of CVC kiosks by other kinds of illicit actors, including narcotics trafficking. So that's something that we're watching very closely. Fraud is a top topic for almost any financial institution that I engage with, whether it's a 1 or 2 person MSB shop or the largest banks in the world. Fraud is almost always top of mind. And that's true in the digital asset space as well as true in the traditional finance space. And that go along with that is, of course, going to be cryptocurrency investment scams, sometimes called pig butchering. So we recently took an action against Way1 to sever them from the U.S. financial system. That's obviously a trend that we, the Department of Justice, a wide range of actors are spending a lot of time and attention on, not only because of the loss to American consumers as part of those scams, but also because of the human smuggling and trafficking that's happening in these scam centers overseas. In addition to that, if you haven't seen, just last week we issued a financial trend analysis on ransomware. Some good news in ransomware. It's probably too early to call it a trend, but we actually hit a high of ransomware payments in 2023 and they dropped in 2024. So remains a huge problem, obviously, and it's a 1-year drop, but we're going to take that as good news, as I'm sure you all will as well. But ransomware is obviously something that we are and continue to watch very, very closely in this particular space.
It's funny because those issues are issues that have been around, right? I mean,
Exactly.
they continue and they evolve, particularly with the fraud issue. I mean, you talk to every major institution, it's about fraud, but it's how you're handling it. And fraud has such implications, not only for the people who are being defrauded, whether it's the elderly or those who are more victimized, but it's also nation states who are making tons of money off of it at the end of the day, and that's the way that they're financing all their activities overseas. So.
And the way I often frame it is fraud is always new and always old. It's always going to be a problem. It's always changing, but the threat is certainly not going to go away. The Department of Justice will never prosecute their way out of it, and we will never fix it entirely. And so it remains a thing that we all need to be conscientious of and think about how we can work together as industry and government to tackle this really huge problem.
And you'll see it. It's amazing how many, and I'm sure everybody in this room whose parents have called them and said, should I answer this email? Or should I call this person who's telling me I owe them money and I can pay them in cryptocurrencies? I mean, that happens every day despite all the education that we think is out there, right? But believe it or not, there's not a lot out there, and it changes, right? I mean, a lot of people get these emails from Apple computers saying, you need to call me because your computer's frozen. Well, who isn't going to call them? A lot of people do. So it's about educating them, but that is the way bad people and bad nation states are making a lot of money.
We're going to have to start a soapbox on scams here.
Well,
We're aligned on this.
It really is about educating everybody, right? And you know, what is a scam today is going to be a scam 3 years from now, but the sophistication changes.
On the nation state side, Ken, as you mentioned, what are you seeing as the current trends there from an illicit finance perspective?
It's across the board. It's everything. It's romance scams. It's, you know, cybersecurity breaches. It's, you know, ransomware. You know, all those kinds of things. I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, it's exhausting how much is out there. But, you know, we just need to be really, really vigilant. And when the government, believes it or not, when they send out advisories and alerts, those are the kinds of things that everybody should really be looking at because they mean something. That means when they send it out, that means the government knows something because otherwise it wouldn't be going out.
And in terms of, you know, thinking about the national security illicit finance risk, Jackie, obviously OFAC and FinCEN are under the umbrella of TFI. How are they working together, you know, currently? What's changing, what's evolving in terms of working together to attack illicit finance threats?
Yeah, so I think especially if you've followed a number of actions that we have taken over the last probably 6 months, I can count more actions that we have done in conjunction with OFAC, I think, than actions that we have done without OFAC. And a lot of those have had a Department of Justice angle as well. So I can count probably on one hand the number of days in the last 6 months when I haven't talked with someone at OFAC about a particular issue that's in the space, and we have very close coordination with the Department of Justice as well. So it is a very close relationship between FinCEN and OFAC. We spend a lot of time thinking how we can maximize our impact by packaging actions together. Because we know that when we do that, bad actors and industry notice. So where we have those opportunities, we definitely do leverage them.
I mean, it has to be said. I mean, Andrew came from OFAC, Brad's, you know, from OFAC. They're both from Justice. I mean, so there is a symmetry there that I don't think that's ever been that way before. And it seems very seamless, and it makes a lot of sense when you're talking about special measures or you're talking about sanctions. I mean, those things go hand in hand or at least work well together. And to your point, the Department of Justice component, I mean, you need that kind of enforcement side of the house, and a lot of that information goes to the Department of Justice, whether it's to the U.S. Attorney's offices or to Main Justice.
And you mentioned that the administration priorities for national security mitigation, for illicit finance, are largely going to be the same in terms of how we think about controls for traditional finance and for the digital asset space. In terms of narcotics trafficking,
I think so.
Yes.
I mean, there's a debate, right? But I think so.
We'll go with your view of the debate for today. Obviously, narcotics trafficking, huge priority for the administration. And how do you see that being helpful in terms of controlling risk for financial institutions, that intense focus of the administration?
I don't know about helpful, but they certainly need to comply, right? I think it's hard when you're designating gang members or you're designating institutions, because if you've ever run a bank or a financial institution, your controls have to change, right? And they don't change overnight. You know, you have to be able to program all that in there. And sometimes you don't know whether the person is related to a cartel or whether they're an associate or whether, you know, frankly, your fuzzy logic got it wrong, right, at the end of the day. So I think it makes it more difficult. But at the end of the day, you know, since 2018, you've got 250,000 dead Americans because of fentanyl. And that means something. And if you've ever spoken to a family member who's lost somebody through that, you understand why they're making it an emphasis. Now, you can disagree with it, but at the end of the day, they've got good reason. And that doesn't even count the 150,000 dead Mexicans through the war on drugs, right? So there is an emphasis here, and one of the choke points and one of the areas that they found to be really, really helpful, and we saw this in the opioid addiction where we were following the money. And that money went to physicians, it went to nurses, it went to pharmacists who were making money on people's addiction. So it is important for financial institutions to listen to what the government is saying, because it stops these bad things from happening. And it's going to make it difficult. I think it's difficult in my clients that I'm advising. Who at the end of the day, it is about knowing who your customer is. Really knowing who your customer is. And isn't fake knowing, it's really knowing, because the consequences now can be pretty severe.
And on the fentanyl issue, Jackie, I mean, FinCEN has put out dedicated alerts related to fentanyl. And, I think the typologies can be different from other drug trafficking typologies in terms of illicit finance risk.
They certainly can be, and that's one of the things that we try to do, and Ken alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that when we do put out advisories and alerts in these particular products, sometimes we're signaling a change, sometimes we're signaling that things remain the same, but we want to make sure that we're really drawing people's attention to it. So reading those products carefully, looking at the red flags, we try to be very clear when we are doubling down on red flags that maybe we issued 2 years ago, but remain pertinent, versus where we're seeing a change in the criminal marketplace. So we hope that those products are helpful to you all as you're thinking about how to really maximize the impact that you have. And we want to be clear that those drive reporting. And we know when we issue those advisories and alerts, we have law enforcement customers on the other end who are waiting for that suspicious activity report with that tag. And the impact that you can have by identifying that, properly tagging it, we really do. We have customers who are ready and willing, search that tag on a daily basis that's in one of those alerts, and are waiting to take action on that typology. So that's something that I don't think FinCEN says often enough with those advisory products, is those are in part always closely done with law enforcement. It's because we have a law enforcement customer often who really wants that tag, really is looking for that SAR.
And those things aren't written overnight. I mean, that takes time to write. So you know that issue has been festering, right? And it's something important that you should be looking at. And one thing I want to make really clear, particularly for those who are working at financial institutions, those advisories, those red flags aren't only meant for the compliance people. It's actually meant for your first line of defense as well. So you should be sharing those with those individuals. They're going to see things that the compliance people will never see.
On the rulemaking side, in the digital asset space, obviously a lot of activity. I know there's some information, Jackie, you can share, which will be helpful. Again, it's been a little slower in getting to speak directly with government officials at conferences, so we're thrilled for any insights you can share about the rulemaking activity and what you see coming over the next year.
Yeah, so I certainly think first and foremost is under the Genius Act, we'll be writing a series of rules that will relate to another mouthful, permitted payment stablecoin issuers. We are trying to get PIPC going as the shorthand for that, because PPSI is not great and permitted payment stablecoin issuers is too much. So we issued, the Department of Treasury issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking early this fall, initially had a 30-day comment period, ended up extending that to 45. I believe there were about 400 comments. That was a broad, wide-ranging ANPRM. We, of course, had a number of illicit finance questions in there that talked about things like program requirement, customer identification. We received some really great input and feedback, and we'll be thinking about all of those comments as we embark upon next steps for our PIPC rulemakings.
And I think there is always a challenge that, FinCEN Treasury's mission is to ensure there's a responsible framework to control illicit finance. But, I do think obviously the messaging from the administration is we want that to be balanced and have the controls actually focus on illicit finance as opposed to checking the box. And how is that going to be balanced from your perspective over the rulemaking, the advisories?
Carefully. I certainly think the Secretary and Undersecretary have had a number of public comments on this where they've been very clear that all of our regulations will be fit for purpose and that they will keep in mind that we need to balance burden as well as benefit to law enforcement, and that we are all best served when financial institutions can put their greatest resources towards the most significant illicit finance threats. So whether that is thinking about the traditional finance space or the digital asset space, all of those lessons, all of those talking points that you're hearing from Treasury leadership are going to hold true. We sit here at FinCEN at a very fascinating intersection between industry and law enforcement equities. And sometimes it's unfortunate that I hear people talk about those interests being misaligned. In my experience, they're not. When I talk to financial crimes compliance people at financial institutions, they are just as energized and enthused about fighting financial crimes as an FBI agent or a DOJ prosecutor. And so I don't think it's about aligning misaligned interest. I think it's about thinking about how we leverage the collective power of the private and public sector to really bring everything that we have to bear on these illicit finance problems.
It's a balance, and one of the things that FinCEN does is with the FinCEN exchange and with the public-private partnerships, which is really critical, getting that feedback from industry, but not just on the crypto side, not just on the digital asset side, but also, believe it or not, and this might be a bad word here, but also the TriFi side, right? You've got to get everybody in the room, and there has to be constant conversation. And we're not always going to agree, but in order to get to the right place, at least some place that looks balanced, you're going to have that constant, regular input from people. And that's critical. And, you know, people who may never want to sit at the table together are going to have to do it. Because at the end of the day, you're seeing both sides now merge. You know, one may eat the other. We'll see how that goes. But at the end of the day, in order to get that balance, there's going to have to be that conversation. And by the way, the conversation you have at a FinCEN exchange today may be very different in the fall of next year. Just because the industry innovates so quickly and there's so many other products are out there so quickly, so the conversation has to be constant.
And Ken, can you share some more detail on FinCEN Exchange? You know, what it is, how you see it operating today from the private sector perspective? So
FinCEN Exchange was basically a enhanced version of 314B. Right, getting people together, having conversations from different parts of the industries in one place with the government, right? You have government people there, you have industry people there, and honestly, it's something very similar to this, at least the way that we would do it. It's a conversation. What are the typologies out there? What are the interests? What are the burdens for industry? What are the burdens for law enforcement? How do we reconcile those things? And what ended up happening, or what typically happens, is you find different solutions to problems that are out there by the people who are actually experiencing it. The trick with the FinCEN exchange is, what do you do once it's done? Right? What do you do with that information, and how you disseminate that to industry and to law enforcement, and how does it find itself in rulemaking? Those are the hard things that happen, but it is a conversation that happens between experienced people in industry and in law enforcement. That's basically what it does.
And Jackie, from the FinCEN perspective on these public-private partnerships, how are you seeing them work in operation? Where are there further opportunities in the digital asset space?
Yeah, so the exchanges are, I think, one of the really fundamental pieces of what FinCEN does, is we use our power of convening to get the right people in the right room at the right time talking about the right topic. And that's really what the FinCEN exchange operates. And sometimes those exchanges are going to be very focused on a particular kind of typology. Other times they can be a little bit broader. So for instance, one we did in, I'm going to test my memory, July or August of last year was unique to digital assets, and we spent time talking not only about illicit finance typologies that are occurring in the digital asset space, but the kinds of technologies, tools, and resources that financial institutions are using to identify and report that activity. So sometimes it's going to be very laser focused on, this is what we're seeing, this is the MO, get us reporting as quickly as you can, to something that's a little bit more esoteric, and it's going to be a little bit more, to Ken's point, broad and far-ranging, where we're going to be hearing about what financial institutions are doing operationally, so it can inform our policy-making efforts. And so frankly, institutions can talk to one another about best practices that one bank is doing, and anyone else think that's a good idea. They can also pick up on something that has really become a best practice for one institution.
One thing in the financial crime space is there's no technology that's proprietary. And nobody sees it that way. Everybody's willing to share what they're doing and the kinds of topologies that they are seeing, so that the other person, because it's a whole system, right? You're as strong as your weakest financial institution. So getting everybody on the same page is really important. And to Jackie's point, everybody in the financial crime space is really energized by stuff like this, because what more noble cause than helping those who can't help themselves, right? At the end of the day, it's really important to get it right. But that exchange of solutions and ideas and innovation, because you're talking about ways that you can do better CIP, better ways that you can know your customer, all those kinds of things are discussed at these public-private or FinCEN exchanges.
And obviously, they cover sensitive nation-state actor, national security, illicit finance topics, so are generally confidential. They're under a law enforcement 314 rubric. Jackie, if members are interested in participating in one of these types of exchanges, what's the current process to reach out and say, I'd like to talk about a particular topic and be part of an exchange?
Yeah, so on FinCEN's website, there's a contact us box, which is the best way to get a hold of FinCEN, really, if you don't know someone, is to use that contact us box. When we do create FinCEN exchanges, because these rooms need to be small enough that you can have meaningful conversation, it's nearly impossible to get everyone in a room that we would ideally like to get in a room. But we do try to spread the wealth, so it would seem, to make sure that where we have experts, across law enforcement, across institutions, we're able to leverage that expertise. But there is a contact us box at fincen.gov, and that's probably the best way to express interest.
We have a couple minutes left. Does anyone have questions or comments you want to cover? Nope. Okay, I thought I saw someone saying that. On this issue, Jackie, you said of balancing carefully supporting innovation, the digital asset space generally, and continuing to have appropriate controls. One thing I thought was fascinating recently in that balance is your frequently asked questions on SARs. It was 4 questions, it was simple, but I think incredibly impactful in terms of the burden on financial institutions and the way that some of those procedures were blessed as being less burdensome. So is that the type of thing you expect we'll continue to see in terms of that balance?
I think that's probably the perfect question, in part because I can end where I began, which is that we are really thinking about the broad range of tools that we have. And something that we can do in the regulatory risk space is sub-regulatory sorts of actions, things like these FAQs. So one of the things that we are doing is thinking about, where have there been complaints from financial institutions that something just isn't working? Is it something that is actually a regulatory requirement? Or is it something that we can fix via a misunderstanding by something like a guidance or an FAQ? Another good example is earlier this year, we put out acceptive orders with all of the federal banking agencies related to obligations for a customer identification program. This is going to be more for banks because it deals with CIP and TIN issues. But that's another place where we were approached by industry about something that just was dated. It wasn't working. It no longer made sense. And we were asked if we could do something about it. So we put out a request for comment. We took in input from across the sector and came out with this being a solution where we could have a positive impact. We could reduce some compliance obligation, and we could still, maintain the high quality reporting and KYC protocols that folks have for CIP. So that's another example where we're trying to think creatively about where we can have meaningful impact in this space. Rulemakings take a very long time. So what can we do short of rulemaking that will have impact?
Great. Well, please thank the panel with me. It was a great discussion. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.